into some of the content, but we are definitely available to discuss with you anything that you heard here today, or to provide references for where the information came from, or to help you connect with people in your community where you could dig deeper into some of the things that we share today. So welcome to this webinar on civic engagement. We titled it Be the Change because we know we are at a time when people are trying to understand how to be the change in their community, and in a time where so many people who have become active in ways that maybe they previously had not. We want to make sure that you have the tools and skills to make your advocacy and your civic engagement the most effective that it can be. So tonight, sharing this information, who you have with you here right now, myself, I am Vashti Rutledge. I am one of the AIT fellows. I represent Ohio and a broader area through the Northeast and dipping its toes a little bit into the Midwest. Also here, one of our other fellows is Elizabeth Sampson Lee, who represents the true Midwest. So she's got the part of the Midwest that's actually close to the western part of the country, Minnesota, and she's got Illinois, right? And she'll share more when she has a chance. And then one of our fellows who has the West Coast area, Alexis, will not be able to join us this evening, but we're hoping that we'll have an opportunity to either do kind of a follow-up conversation with this, maybe on social media, and hope that she can share her input there as she is a civic leader. She is the mayor of her community. And then Foxy Jackson, who is our last fellow who manages the Southern region. And if she is not here yet, she should be shortly. So all in together, which throughout this conversation you will likely hear us refer to as AIT, is a nonprofit organization with a mission to nonpartisan to get as many women as possible into action-oriented civic engagement. So how do we become involved in our community in a way that allows us to be as representative of our community as the numbers that we truly are? And part of that is that AIT has a community leadership program, which is meant to close the gender gap with women all across the country participating. And it is a volunteer-led program where folks are given knowledge, some content, so lots of knowledge around civic engagement, as well as a community of other folks who are interested in civic engagement with the opportunity to build together, to collaborate, to commiserate, but also really just to grow how they are involved civically in their communities, including participating in some lobbying days. And I know previously last year, there were a group of fellows who went to DC together. Obviously, in the current environment, everything looks really differently, but we are excited to get back to a time where folks can be face-to-face on the ground and talking to their elected officials face-to-face again soon. So what we want to cover today, it's too much, but we're going to do our best. Really, we want to just ground you in the idea of what civic engagement is. Some folks may not have a definition in mind, or there tends to be a definition that people have that may be fairly stringent, where they believe that it's, just being in elected office. And we want to break that down. We also want to talk about the 2020 census, because right now it's incredibly important that we as engaged community members complete our censuses. We also want to share a little bit about who represents you, how they do that representation, and where the breaks are so that you can be thoughtful as you try to engage with elected officials, whether it's at the local level to the federal level. And then we'll touch a little bit on legislative advocacy, give you some tools and ideas around thinking about the priorities that you want to focus in on. If you're someone who likes to dip your toes in lots of different areas, how can you focus in more to be more impactful? How do you use your own story? how to meet with lawmakers, what it takes to make those meetings effective. And then if we close, if we'll have time, we'll help you all with creating an action plan. But at a minimum, what we can do is, for everyone who's registered, can send you an email later with a toolkit that will help you with that. For those of you who are new to All In Together or have not connected with us on social media, we are on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. So you can follow us on all of those platforms. Our handles are here on the screen. I'm on Twitter a lot, so I can tell you that the Twitter postings have been frequent. Right now, one of the great things that the team is doing is that they have been tweeting about all of the conventions, and both the Democratic and the Republican, with just fact-based information about the speakers. And I think that's a really great way for people to sometimes get past their partisan viewpoint and just understand maybe a little bit more about where a speaker is coming from or how they got to the stage in the first place. So the reason why AIT focuses on women is because there's so much opportunity for us to lead in this country in ways that were either not available to us previously, or in ways that we are creating of our own. And so that means, leading both at home, at work, but also in the political sphere as well. Right now, women outvote men in this country. And that statistic, as you can see, just looking at this chart, regardless of the voting trends in the country, so we know that, right, voting tends to go up during presidential elections, and then there's the turnout drops on those off years. But regardless of what is happening during those big elections, you'll see here like 2012, 2008, 2016, women are outvoting men by a number that is statistically significant. So we really, truly have the ability to be decision makers in elections and who represents us. And now we see more and more women who are in elected office. Now, the disparities from men to women is definitely still in existence, given our fairly even split in the population. It's fairly incredible how few women are in politics, but at the national level. But as we can see from the local level to the national level, more and more women are being elected into offices and taking on leadership roles within both their parties and in formal roles within the government. So here are just the gender gaps that exist currently in representation. And we just use, because we're all from different places and we figure you might be as well, we have Idaho is kind of like our state to use for the numbers. But at the federal level in particular, you'll see that men, there's a 75 to 25% split between men and women at both the Senate and the House. It's actually a little bit higher at the House, but that those numbers are fairly significant. So before I tell you, there are just a few states who, well, I forgot to hide the answers of the states, so now you guys can count. But in 2020, there were only 9 women who were serving as governors as their states, and the states are here below. If you watch the news, you've probably seen some of these women on the TV talking about issues in their state, both in support of and in opposition to some of the federal administration's approach to some of the issues around COVID, but they have been really standing up and speaking out about the issues in their state. But we also have, so that's great, we have 9 states who have women governors, and that's great for us as a country to move towards, but we also have 20 states who have never had a woman as governor. And so even at the city level, women only make up 22% of US mayors. I think sometimes when women are in the spotlight, we can start to think that we have a bigger portion of the representation. But even though we may see some female mayors a lot on TV, I think recently Mayor Keisha Bottoms from Atlanta has been on the news a lot because of things happening there. The mayor of Chicago has been on the news a lot as well, but they are just a small portion of the mayors in the city who are in the country who are actually women. So why is 2020 so important? Why do we want to get as much information out to people as possible? Because we've got big November elections coming up, and not just the presidential election. There are a lot of issues and a lot of positions up. So in your communities, right, when you're thinking about how you want to vote, you're not thinking just about whether or not you're going to, vote party lines, or whether or not you're going to vote for the Biden-Harris ticket or the Trump-Pence ticket, but also what's happening at your state level. What's happening in your county? Is there a prosecutor that's up for election? I know that's a big election here in Cincinnati, where I am at. Presidential elections really drive who comes out to vote. So we have an opportunity to get more people out to vote because they tend to get excited about 2020 elections, but we definitely want them to think about the other elections as well. We want to elevate the things that are happening to women, for women, and the issues that really speak to some things that are not always equal. So we know that women manage a significantly higher portion of home in comparison to their male partners, regardless of whether or not they have a full-time job. And so in a time like this, when women are both working full-time, parenting full-time, and now trying to potentially manage remote learning for their children at home, there are issues that are very specific to us and how we view our role in the world. And so we want to elevate those conversations as a collective, even if we have different viewpoints on how that we should come to a solution. And so particularly because we are isolated in a way that we've never been before, we want to use this opportunity to really build connections. So as a country, it probably is not a surprise to most of you that people feel that our divisions have gotten worse. And so a lot of people are following this election maybe closer than they did before, but not a lot of people are getting involved. And I think for a lot of people right now, they don't know what they should do. So less than 10% of people actually do more than vote. Particularly for women, in the younger demographic, so folks under 30, they're less likely to get involved than their male peers. And this is something that and the reason why is something that is not just about politics, but it tends to be also something that comes up for women when they are looking at employment as well. They feel they need more practical information before getting involved in politics. One of the things that you often hear when women are applying for new jobs is that they'll look at the qualifications, and if they don't meet one of them or two of them, they'll think, oh, I can't apply for this job, while their male peer might only meet half of them and he goes for it. And so it's a bigger, right, cultural phenomenon, but it's this idea of wanting to have as much of the information, as much of the skills, knowledge, and ability possible before you jump in. And really what we're saying is show yourself a little grace. We're all learning. And if you're interested in getting active, let's go out there and do it. And so really want to jump into how do we redefine what civic engagement is and what comes to mind when you think about it. Redefining civic engagement for us is really this idea around, it's not just being up for election. It is going to the town hall to talk. I know that's something that was really popular recently with folks. Budgets were up. Here in my community, I'll just say that our budget meetings had to be extended as well as held at our convention center because so many people wanted to participate in the budget meeting, which was normally held at City Hall, which because of social distancing couldn't accommodate the huge volume of people who wanted to put their voice on the record. So that is civic engagement. People being out and protesting about what they want to see happen in their city is part of civic engagement. Voting, filling out your census, volunteering, even writing an op-ed. Those are all ways that you can impact your community, as well as doing those big things if you decide that you want to run for the school board or city council or for a larger elected office position. And so I'm going to pause here so that I can turn it over to my friend and colleague, Elizabeth, so she can tell us about the 2020 census engagement.
Thank you, Vashti. Hello, everyone. So the 2020 census is a really big deal right now. We want to make sure that we're counted, and we also want to make sure that everybody we know is counted as well. So every 10 years, the U.S. Census Bureau conducts a nationwide survey to measure the population. And the responses to the 2020 census this year will shape how hundreds of billions of dollars, that's billions with a B, in federal funding are distributed to local communities annually for the next decade. And that equates to about $2,800 per person. The census is mandated by the Constitution and has been administered since the year 1790, which is back when George Washington was the president. And the census asks for general information like age, sex, race, and number of people per household. You don't even have to use your name. You can just fill it in as resident 1, resident 2, and so on. The census does not ask about political affiliation, finances, citizenship status, or sensitive and identifying information like social security numbers. And like I said, census participation is vital. Every person counted impacts a decade of funding for public services, government representation. The data is used to create and fund government programs, including public infrastructure like schools and hospitals, social services like elderly and job finding services, as well as emergency response preparedness like responding to disasters, which we're seeing a lot of now down in Louisiana and headed to Texas. This is important to note. The census also determines how you will be represented in government. It determines the allocation of seats in the House of Representatives, and it sets the boundaries for congressional, state, and local districts, and it's where they take the population and do redistricting around that. So it was proposed that a citizenship question be added to the census this year, but that was shot down by the Supreme Court. And what that would have meant was Texas would have been vulnerable to losing a seat in the House of Representatives because of the undercount of citizens in that state. It should also be noted communities of color and low-income communities have been historically undercounted, and that means funding and services don't make it to those communities that need it the most. One reason for the undercount in those communities are census barriers that include language barriers, mistrust in government, a lack of internet connection and access, concerns about privacy and confidentiality, and a low awareness that the census even exists or is being conducted this year. The most at-risk groups for not being counted are children under 5, where the parents don't add these children to their count, racial and ethnic minorities, those with limited English proficiency, immigrants, people experiencing homelessness, and people living on reservations. So in regard to those barriers of mistrust in government and concerns about privacy and confidentiality, who has access to this data? The Census Act ensures that individuals' responses cannot be used against them in any way. So under the Act, it is illegal for the Census Bureau to disclose identifying information of a respondent. Anyone other than Census Bureau's employees do not have access to the data. It's to be used for non-statistical purposes, and the Bureau cannot disclose responses to other government agencies as a form of tracking by any means. So it's not too late to complete your census. The deadline has been moved up a month. It was October 31st. It is now September 30th. So it's critical that that be done. The population of all 50 states, District of Columbia, and 5 U.S. territories will be counted. And for the first time in history, you can respond online, by phone, or by mail. And more detailed information has been sent to households back in April. And if you don't have that paperwork laying around, you can still access your census through their website at 2020census.gov. And to break the barrier of language, census information has been translated into 59 languages. So now we'll get to the information of who represents you, and this ties into the census. As we talked about, redistricting is a huge factor. So the 3 levels of representation for us here in the United States is federal, state, and local. The federal representatives are the President and Congress, which has 100 senators, 2 per state. And you can see that they represent a vast amount of people, anywhere between 600,000 to 35 million. 435 U.S. House of Representative members. The number of House members per state is determined by the share of the U.S. population, which is determined by the census. Each state has a minimum of 1 House member, and you can see that they represent, on average, 710,000 people, so it's kind of at the lower end of the Senate, what the senators represent. So there are differences between the House and the Senate. The House has 435 voting members, where the Senate has 100. The House has a smaller staff and budget, where the Senate has a larger staff, about almost 4 times what the House has. The House has power of the purse, which means it originates tax and appropriation bills, and also powers of impeachment, which we've seen this year. And the Senate deals with presidential appointments and ratifying treaties. Because the House members serve 2-year terms, they are always campaigning, whereas senators serve 6-year terms, and 1/3 of Senate is up for re-election every 2 years. So senators are always part of the elections when the House members are, but only 1/3 of them each time. So now the state level consists of an executive branch and a legislative branch. The executive branch is made up of the governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, and secretary of state, which is the office that handles elections. The state legislature is the legislative branch with 1 House of Representative members and 2 senators, as we discussed. State government structures are laid out in the constitutions of the state and are unique to each state. So some executive branch leaders are typically elected, while others are appointed by the governor. And we have 49 states that have a bicameral legislature, which means House and Senate, upper and lower house. Nebraska is the only state with a unicameral legislature, which means they only have 1 house, and they refer to themselves as senators. And the term lengths and limits vary from state to state. So now the powers of the states. They conduct elections, which is what we're seeing now. They establish welfare programs, education, law enforcement and public safety, as well as state highways. They regulate business and state taxes, and they create the local and county governments. So your local representatives are the ones who are most accessible to you. It consists of the mayor, city and or town council. They serve as the local legislative body of your community by proposing bills and passing laws. Elections may also be held for judges, prosecutors, county clerks, and other offices. Vashti referred to the fact that these are really important positions, so don't overlook their importance while you're voting, because these positions actually have the most direct impact on your communities. The local government share responsibilities with the state and derive all powers from state government. So how that looks is with the COVID crisis, each state is responsible for, deciding how their states operate. We're here in Minnesota, the governor gave full power to school districts to decide if they're opening schools, starting with distance learning, or how that works. So the power trickles down to where the decisions need to be made. They operate on two-tiered structures with counties and cities, towns, or municipalities. So at the local government, this is where you pay your taxes. We pay taxes everywhere, but according to where you live and if you own a house and things like that. They enforce state laws within their borders. They maintain jails, lead community development initiatives such as preventing homelessness, decreasing unemployment, or making neighborhoods safer. They direct the actions of public works such as maintaining streets and sewers, and the police and fire departments are overseen by the local governments and also oversee municipal courts. So the important thing to keep in mind here is that the federal, state, and local levels of government all work in tandem, which is really coming to light during these times of COVID. So pay attention to who's doing what.
Hi, it's Vashti again. So how do you get engaged and what do you need to do with your elected officials right in the heart of a campaign season? And we want to talk with you all a little bit about that. Oops, too fast. So we, AIT, one of the things that we do as an organization is we do a lot of polling, which is often used by national media to help get a better understanding around what women think about the current political atmosphere. But also one of the things that we found is that less than half of women are engaging politically outside of what they do on social media. And that when given that, women of color are significantly more likely to participate than their white counterparts in all of those categories, regardless of if it's on social media or not. So you can see below some of the activities that folks have been involved in since the previous election. I think if we think back to, it feels like 10 lifetimes ago, but after the last election, right, there was a huge women's march that was meant to be an incredibly intersectional opportunity for women of all walks of life to come together and share their disappointment, so to speak, around the current state of affairs for women and also with some of the outcomes of the election. I think that that was a really incredible moment, but in a lot of ways, it was just a moment. We still have a huge portion of women who haven't figured out how or where they want to get involved beyond kind of, maybe it's commenting on a Facebook post or sharing something on Twitter. So how can you get involved? Well, there are the things that you can do that are quick and easy. One of them is making sure you are registered to vote. And we're going to talk about that more during this part of the conversation. You can also volunteer. So if you're something you're passionate about or a candidate that you're passionate about, there are a lot of easy ways to volunteer for campaigns. If you're not as lucky as me, who gets text messages from folks all the time about those opportunities, all you have to do is share your phone number or email address, and they will definitely let you know when they need your help. There are some really organized get out the vote campaigns going on in pretty much every community across the country. So really it's just a question of finding out who in your community is running one. There are nonprofits in the community who are interested in making sure people are registered to vote. There's national organizations who want to do that. One of the things, though, that is really going to be needed this election season, because right now the numbers are down, is poll workers, right? So for those of you who go to your, right, whether it's the school or if you don't go to your board of elections, but right, you're at the community center or the YMCA and you go to vote. If you've ever noticed, a lot of times the poll workers are older adults, right? Folks who are retired. And those folks are at a higher risk for being out in public. And so if you are someone who can potentially become a poll worker, it's a great opportunity to take a burden off of someone who maybe can't go out, who has done this for many elections previously. And you may even be able to check with your employer to make sure that your time off is excused. And then another thing that you can do is contact your elected officials. So if there's something you care about or something you want to rally behind, their phone numbers are available to call their offices. You can Google any elected official's name and you will find some level of contact information for email or phone. And although you might not get them directly, you will likely get a member of their team. There's an opportunity to share your thoughts and potentially move forward. So one of the unfortunate things about voting in this country is that our turnout just tends to hang in the 60s. And so in 2016, there's been lots of discussions about why more folks didn't come out to vote like they did in 2008 or again in 2012, but the numbers were down and only 61% of eligible voters actually turned out in that election. Let's make that number look terribly small for 2020. And so in 2018, almost 67% of eligible voters were registered and almost 69% of eligible women voters were registered. So there's space there for growth. And if we can get even more folks registered, I mean, it would be absolutely incredible if we could see 70% of registered voters actually come out and vote. So election season is ramping up, right? We had the DNC convention last week. We've got the Republican National Convention this week, and the time is upon us. And so if you want to make sure that your registration is up to date, you can go to the AIT website and you can go to our Action Center, and it will help you with state-specific voter guides. So it'll tell you when the voter registration deadline is, what the election rules for your state are, questions about confidentiality, changes to the election, because there are a lot of things that have changed, or there's a lot of questions that people have right now. One of the other places you can go to your state website, you can go to your county board of elections, and they will have, right, all the information you need. Some states is easier than others. In Ohio, I can just go online, check my registration, make sure that I was like, did I change it when I moved, right? Oh, let me go online and check. Yes, my current address is there. My polling place is there. And I know, oh, if I want to register absentee, here's the form that I need to fill out. For those of you who have your cell phone handy, you can scan this code and it will help you register to vote. So I'm going to leave that there for just a second if anybody wants to pull that up, if you're not registered already. But if you have any doubts, if you've registered or if you've moved counties or states, you want to make sure that your registration is up to date and that you get it completed before the deadline, because you want your vote to be counted, and anything that you can do to make sure that all of your information is correct is the best thing to do, particularly this year where there are so many barriers that are kind of out of most of our control. So one of the things we would love to see people do is take our 20 and 20 pledge and register 20 new voters. So if this is something you're interested in, you can go to our website and 20 and 20. We have tools and info. And if you're just thinking about it, just think, oh, who do I have? 5 folks are in my family, or my cousin, I have a cousin, she just graduated high school. And I'm like, I wonder, did they help them register to vote especially because I remember the first time I registered, I was at school, but they went home in March. So I don't know if she got that help. She's one of the people who I want to make sure is registered to vote this year, right? You have a college student, they likely need an absentee ballot or need to figure out if they're able to register in the community where they're going to college. All of those are folks that are great ideas to check up on, and you can start with those folks who are closest to you to get them registered. If you want to figure out like, how do I already got stuff going on and I don't need another program. But one of the easy ways to do this is you could just literally have, you know, the paperwork for folks available at the front desk in your office space, right? So if there's a form that people have to fill out to request an absentee ballot, you have to print out this form and then send it to the Board of Elections. You could print out a stack of them and have them at your organization. And then that way, folks who don't have printers, right, have access to the form and can fill it out and then get that sent off. You could do it formally, you could do it informally. But one of the things you want to be really careful for is that you don't want to collect forms from folks. There are very, very few known cases of voter fraud that happen in this country every year. And part of that is because we do everything we can to make sure that the person who fills it out is the person who seals it and mails it. So if you have to check with the rules in your state around how you can register and making sure, right, like everyone, how you seal your forms and get them in the mail. And all of those things are going to be incredibly important this year, as we will probably have a record number of folks voting absentee versus in person on election day. One of the things that every campaign really, really needs is volunteers. And so to get this done person to person, it takes a lot of networking, it takes a lot of work, but if it's something that you're interested in, it's really a great opportunity, especially if you're interested in politics, to start to see what it's like, develop a lay of the land, start to network and to learn about what it takes to be a campaigner, and also just a great way to kind of build up your skills, especially if you want to dabble more in speaking publicly. So what we heard is that a little more than a quarter of folks plan to volunteer this year for a campaign. More men than women, though. So, and then that right now, women of color plan to volunteer at almost a 30% rate compared to their white counterparts at just 10%. So if you think, okay, I'm ready to volunteer, here are some of the things you could do. And some of them are more personal than others. And some of them are things that can be done easily from your house, right? So if you're someone who, you know, if you have a health issue or just because we're still in a pandemic and you want to be as safe as possible, you could do online organizing, you can write postcards, you can make phone calls, and you could do all those things from the comfort of your home. If you are willing to go out into the community, there is still opportunity to go out and do canvassing, which is the folks who are walking up and down the block, hosting a fundraiser. Although I know a lot of folks right now are doing virtual fundraisers, so they're hosting events, but they're doing them virtually. So there's a lot of opportunity to engage as much or as little as you want, and you just figure out what would or could work for you. What you want to know, though, are the logistics. Who's running, what's on the ballot, and when is the election? And that's not even if you're going to become like a volunteer. I think that's information that's just good to know, because if you want to be an educated voter, you want to know how much time you got to do as much research as you feel comfortable with, because the reality is reading all those platforms is not easy to do like the night before an election, particularly when you're trying to vote from the local level to the national level. So give yourself time to learn. And the earlier you do that, the more likely you give yourself an opportunity to find a fit for where you might want to volunteer your time. And then what are you interested in doing? And how much time do you have to give? And then think exactly, you know, carefully, what do I have to give? And I think whatever that is, the campaign will be excited to accept that and to have you on their team. You can reach out to campaigns directly or just sign up for volunteer opportunities. You know, typically it's August and there's, like so many cool things happening in all of our cities, right? Where we're walking around and we, taste of your, whatever your city is, or like the big event. And there's usually the campaigns out there recruiting and passing out information. And that's not happening this year. So instead, what you can do is go online and figure out who it is you're interested in volunteering for and reach out to their campaign and start there and move it on. If you do give them a note, kind of give them an idea of what you want to do. And then that might help them, make sure the person who calls you back is the right person and figure out how they can use your great skills. Another thing is donating. So I'm gonna go through this quickly because we don't have much time and it gets really complicated. But the reality is that women and candidates of color have a hard time raising money in political races. And so look at this number. Women running for Congress raised on average $500,000 less than their male counterparts. Now, this number, I'm sure, can go much, much higher because if you didn't know, many of these campaigns, not including the presidential campaign, parties and individuals spend millions of dollars on some of the not only national campaigns, but also state campaigns. So when you think about the struggles to raise money for candidates, if it's something you're interested in seeing more women elected or more candidates of color, the financials matter. As an individual, we can donate up to $2,500 per campaign per election. And if you are donating through an official party, donations are capped at $30,000. Now, one of the ways in which donors kind of make their collective voice heard is through PACs. And so you take especially if you're like, I don't know, it's not for just this one person, but it's for a larger group, then you can make a donation to a PAC. It's up to $5,000 a year. And then that money, the PAC then manages the disbursement of those dollars. Some of you may have heard about super PACs. They cannot work directly with the candidate, but oftentimes are parroting or speaking language very similar to the candidate that they support. And there is no legal limits on how much money someone can donate to a super PAC. So I think there are some members of Congress, particularly who will share that they are not taking money from super PACs because the money can be seen as, I'll just say, unfair at times, but it's there, it's legal, and lots of candidates use that money to help fuel their campaigns indirectly. And one of the other things you could do is just donate to an organization that you are really passionate about their work and their advocacy work. So if there's a 501c4 that you are like, they are speaking my language and I want to support them, and they can kind of, take whatever advocacy role they want, you could donate directly to that nonprofit, and then you can give them all of your money if you so choose.
Vashti, can I add something here quick?
Yes, please.
So here in Minnesota, they will refund you a single donation for $50, or for a couple it's $100. So what you do is fill out a form and send in the receipt from the campaign, and they will refund you that money. And you can either, not do anything after that, or then take that refund and apply it to another campaign. So that's at both the state and local level. So I suggest checking your state Secretary of State's website to see if they offer something like that, because it's really pretty impactful.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that, Elizabeth. Mm-hmm. So getting out the vote, we talked about this, every vote counts. So text a friend, If there's a way for you to take time off work, or if your work gives you time, there are some employers who will say, you can get 4 hours, right, to spend on things related to civic engagement or voting. But you can also do small things, right? Have some friends come over, or folks in your bubble, if you have your own bubble, and you can do phone calls or do postcards together just to remind folks to get out and vote. As I shared, being a poll worker is probably going to be huge this year. One of the things that as a poll worker that you want to do is make sure that everyone feels welcome. And so regardless of your personal political affiliation, you are there to make sure that people are able to exercise their right to vote in this country. And so the more diversity we can bring to those spaces, the better. But we definitely want to make sure that everyone who walks through the door feels comfortable and is able to be understood through language, right? People are there with various levels of technological skill so that folks can get their votes in and do troubleshooting and make sure that our elections are as fair and open as possible. Poll workers are paid. So what you want to do, if it's something you want to do personally or through your job, make sure you kind of figure out how that works. But just contact your local elections office, board of elections, find out what does it take to be a poll worker. If it's something you're interested in doing for this November, I would say you want to take a look at that as soon as possible, because you want to make sure that there's enough time to do the poll worker training. And then last, you can go to our Action Center again. So our AIT website is a wealth of knowledge. It'll help you. You can go there, right, get information about voter registration. Also look up your representatives. There's templates there for sending them email messages. You can use our state-specific voter guides, and all of that information is there for you to use and also for anyone else to use. So if one of the things that you come out of this with is, wow, there's a resource there that I can send to everybody I know, and it doesn't matter what state they live in, that the information that they need, they're going to be able to access through that website, that would be absolutely fantastic. If you want to find your local information, you should probably go to your city or county's government website, right? And so then that way you can see the breakdown, right? What's happening in the county level, what's getting ready for elections, as well as at the city level. So we don't have all the information, but we do have a lot of it. And so our last piece of the conversation tonight is on the legislative advocacy. And I am going to just for 1 second pause just to make sure that I'm not skipping someone. Okay. Thank you. All right, I'm gonna give you a little bit of this information. We don't have a lot of time, and so I'm probably just gonna get this started and then just gonna prime a little bit about how we could potentially continue this conversation later. So one of the things that happens is that we tend to care about a lot of things. People talk about single issue voters a lot, but the reality is our lives are more complicated than that. And there are so many things that we care about, from both things happening in our city, right, and our schools, how, the health of our community, where they're going to put a new, zoning rights. There's so many things that we care about, right? Things that affect our homes if we're homeowners, things that will affect generations well beyond ours when we think about things that happen at the federal level, or how who is elected impacts who potentially gets nominated for the Supreme Court, and what that will look like for things that we had considered to be law for a very long time, and how long will that last. There's just so many different things. So you're thinking, I care about all of these issues. Which one should I actually focus on? That's a hard thing to think about. So one of the things you have to ask yourself is, okay, what am I good at? What do I have experience in? Is there a sense of urgency around any of these issues? And what am I really passionate about? And if you can kind of figure out what's in the middle of those spaces, there's a great starting place for how you can figure out what issues to start on. So is there something that you're so passionate about that if someone said they weren't supporting it, that you couldn't vote for them, right? So last week for the Democratic Convention. The Democrats did do kind of like the normal unveiling of the platform component of the work, and it made a lot of news that Representative Tlaib did not vote for the party platform. And the reason why she didn't vote for the party platform is it didn't include Medicare for all, right? So she had not necessarily a candidate. She didn't say she's not supporting the candidate, but she didn't support the platform because it was missing this one issue. If there's something you feel that strongly about, you get to make that decision, whether it's about a platform, if you belong to a party, or if it's about a candidate and you're saying, well, they don't support, right? They don't support this issue, so I don't support them. Or it's what impacts you directly, or what are the things that it's like, we got to get on this right now because it's impacting people today and we need to change it tomorrow. And so those kind of working that out will help you figure out what your issue can be. Then you have to figure out where. And I think this is one of the most important pieces. One of the reasons why we really wanted to share this information with you all is because one of the things I experienced while going to some of the city budget hearings is that there were so many incredibly passionate young people talking to our city council members around, in this particular case, they were very passionate around the defund the police movement. And they wanted to see funds taking out of our city budget, which the majority of do go to police and fire, and they wanted to see some of that money reallocated. And they were asking for a host of things. But one thing that kept coming up over and over and over again were our schools. Unfortunately, the city doesn't have any control over the school budget, right? And so it's making sure that when you show up and you're talking to your elected officials and you're telling them what you need and what you want for your community, that the reason why they're telling you no is because of a decision that they have to make and stand firm on, and not because you made the wrong ask. And so it's really important to understand who controls what, right? Who's over infrastructure and zoning in your community versus who's managing, whether or not the children's health insurance program. And so the difference between going to a local office and a state government office is really important. And it doesn't mean that the other one can't be on your side or help you advocate and influence, but you at least want to make sure you're asking the right area of government for whatever it is you're advocating towards. Meetings are really important. Believe it or not, folks who make time and talk to their legislators actually influence them on the issues. So if your member or senator is kind of like, I don't know what I'm going to do, or maybe leaning to one side, and then a bunch of their constituents show up in their office to say, hey, this is what the people who you represent believe, that can have an impact. And the more personal that advocacy is, the the greater the impact. So sending emails are great, but it's oftentimes done as a campaign where they can possibly be kind of overlooked, right? So those don't tend to have as, the broadest amount of impact versus actually showing up in person or, an individualized message. So like some of those larger campaigns can still have an impact, but it's not the same as when you're there talking to them. So if you want to request a meeting, you got to be flexible, but you can definitely figure out when are they in session. You can look up the session calendars. Local level is a lot easier. Go with the time that they give you. It's usually not going to be a lot of time that they're going to offer. If you're going to a congressional office, it doesn't matter if you see them in DC or in the district. It's just a question of getting that face time. And when you go to a meeting, know what you want. What do I want to ask for? I'm asking you to vote for something, sponsor something. I'm asking you, there's no legislation on something or hasn't had changes in it, and I want you to be the person who drafts it, but just make sure that you come with a direct ask so that they can know kind of how that time is well spent. And we've included a draft template for asking your legislator, here's my name, this is what I'm asking for, and we can share this with you for later. The more people you have not like a huge group, but if you can not just come as a solo person, but also show that you have, someone who is also a part of cheering on this advocacy. If it's a constituent who has some level of influence in your community, that's always helpful. But if not, if it's just, 2 or 3 folks who are really passionate about the issue, that's important as well. You want to be organized, you want to open up. Here's the issue, this is the challenge we're facing, and here's the ask I have for you. And not expect that they are going to you're going to walk out the door thinking, yes, we got them, or yes, they definitely said they were going to do what we asked, but to be respectful that they may say, oh, okay, me and my team are going to talk about it. But you also feel free to follow up, right? And you can even, see if there's an opportunity to, have another meeting or what happens next. The staff for legislators vary from state to state, from Senate to the House. There's a lot of different factors at play. So you want to kind of, get a feel for whether or not you think you're actually going to get in front of the legislator, whether or not you're going to be meeting with a member of their staff, and that you're not going to get a lot of time. So 30 minutes is a strong amount of time sometimes to get from a legislator. Sometimes the meetings are set for 15 minutes. On the local level, the meetings sometimes are still short, but usually a lot more accessible than trying to get a member of your national representatives' time. So if it's someone who doesn't have a formal office, you can figure out a place to meet where you think you both will feel comfortable, but it also may be an opportunity to make it a less intense experience for you if this is your first time meeting with someone. And then just make sure that after your meeting, you want to send a thank you letter, you want to think about what the follow-up is, and then have a conversation with the folks who you decided to go on this journey with to figure out, what do we need to do to keep this going? And so I know that we are already a minute over. And so as I shared, I didn't think we were going to be able to get you guys an action plan started tonight just because there was so much content. I want to thank you all for taking time out of your evening, as particularly getting on another Zoom, because I know that there is no shortage of Zooms for folks these days. So we really appreciate you taking time, spending some of it with us to think about your civic engagement. Thank you to my co-partner, Elizabeth, for really leading a part of this conversation. And what we would like to do next, at a minimum, is share with you all how to create your action plan. So since we have all your registration information, we'll just send an email with just that content. And if there are questions in the chat, we will go through those and make sure that we get back to you with answers. And with that, I want to say thank you. The hour flew by. I hope you found this information helpful. And I really look forward to, if you do decide to get engaged after this, or you're already engaged, but this gave you something useful, please feel free to share this. We're gonna rebroadcast this at the end of the week and make it available to folks to use as they see fit. And so really want to just provide folks with the information they need to be engaged in their community today, tomorrow, and in the future. So thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of the evening.